And so the point here is that this is what's known as a fence, is you build a little bit of extra fudge room for the person who is supposed to become obedient to whatever it is that they're supposed to be doing. And this allows for them to either have excuses, the bus was running late, or, I got a flat tire or whatever, or something like that, or I lost track of time. You build a fence so that someone doesn't put themselves in danger, right? You have a party on your roof, like could happen in the Middle East. You build a fence around that roof because people might stray too close to the edge and fall off. Well, in Judaism, there were certain commands that if you got too close to them, God would excommunicate you, right? Kick you out of the group. The punishment was karet, being cut off from your people, or the death penalty was attached to certain violations of Torah commands. So what the rabbis did is to avoid hitting those commands, or having collision with those dangerous commands, they would build fences of protection they would build an extra prohibition, a layer of protection, as it were, an extra biblical requirement, so that you don't accidentally violate the command. Like God says, "Hey, I'll if you take my name in vain, you won't be guiltless." So what do the rabbis do? They said, well, we don't want to take God's name in vain, so what do? Let's just remove it from our conversation altogether. And thus the name of God got lost to antiquity by removing it, so that we wouldn't mispronounce it and misuse it and things like that. Those are fences, right? That's what I'm trying to say. Didn't mean to take too much time there, but let's keep going. So what I go on to say is, the point I was trying to bring up by talking about all the fences is that, unfortunately, if you make a fence around a fence, around a fence, around a fence, around a fence, you've got too many fences, too many barriers between the actual commandment and you, the Torah observant person, then you can actually eventually lose sight of the actual command. You're actually only memorizing and paying attention to the fences. Over time, you don't even really remember what God said. You just remember what your rabbi, who spoke in the name of his rabbi, who spoke in the name of his rabbi, who spoke in the name of his rabbi. That's all you remember. And so you end up with a man's opinion built on top of a man's opinion, stacked on top of another man's opinion, and you end up forgetting what God's opinion was on the matter. That's what I mean by the fences. And so by the time of Jesus, there were so many extra man-made fences and opinions and halakha and policies and traditions stacked on top of the Torah that you ended up with a perversion of God's Torah. It was lost to the casual reader or observer or listener or learner. And so Jesus came to cut through all that. It's like, you guys, you've nullified the commandment of God by your traditions and all your other opinions and things like that. Not that opinions are wrong and traditions are wrong. In and of themselves are harmless. So let's keep reading. I go on to say, by the time Yeshua arrived on the scene, and I explain this, the Torah had become all but choked by the traditions of men, the teachings of the sages, and the poison of, are you ready for this? Ethnocentric Jewish exclusivism. Try that one again. Ethnocentric Jewish exclusivism, viz. what Paul calls the works of law. And I don't have time to explain all of what that fancy phrase means, or works of law. You can Google search that term, ethnocentric Jewish exclusivism, or Google phrase covenantal nomism, N-O-M-I-S-M, or works of the law, and look it up in my commentaries, and you'll see what I'm talking about there. Or just go take a peek at my exegetic Galatians commentary, which is available on my website and on this YouTube channel. All right, I go on to say, see how much time we got. We got about 7 minutes left, so keep going. What I go on to say is that the average Jew probably didn't even know where to start in his honest endeavor to become shomer mitzvot, which is a Hebrew phrase that refers to Torah observant, right? So he's fervent for God's will. He wants to do what God asks him to do. He knows it's his duty as an Israelite, as a covenant man, to walk in the covenant ways of God. He wants to be engaged in covenantal nomism and loyalty to the Torah and things like that. But, with all the opinions that were floating around in his day, Rabbi A says this, Rabbi B says that, Rabbi C says that, and the old Talmudic quip is that where there are 2 or 3 Jews, there's at least 5 or 6 opinions. So he doesn't even know what to do, right? Where do I turn? And so there's a lot of confusion that floated around in that day, a lot of factionism going on, a lot of denominationalism, if you want to call it that. And I'll also say, and what about Gentiles seeking to become followers after the God of Israel, right? Where do they fare? How do they fit in? You know, your average Gentile was kind of in a bad place in the first century because he was viewed as an outsider to the people of God, or to kind of like a members-only club. Israel considered themselves a kind of a members-only club, Jews only. And Gentiles wanting to approach God, God of Israel, and become obedient to God's words, were faced with this hurdle of Jewish-only conversion policies. That's part of the ethnocentric Jewish exclusivism baggage that I mentioned earlier. The whole works of law program that you have to change your ethnic status to become a Jew, and then you have to commit yourself to maintenance of Torah commands so that you don't violate your covenant, your place in the covenant, your membership, and put yourself in a position where you're forced to be kicked out. This is all part of the covenantal nomism package, the whole works of the law, Jewish only, the Torah is for Jews only, all of that blindness that existed in Jesus and Paul's Judaisms of the first century.